Hey, Steve Mignon here doing the Junkyard Crawl, and because today is Thursday, Friday, or Saturday, April 13th, 14th, or 15th, I'm actually going to be in Florida at the Barrett-Jackson West Palm Beach collector car auction. So in the meantime, be sure to enjoy this three-part video series on my altered wheelbase funny car models. But we'll be back on Sunday, April 16th, with more Junkyard Crawl. See you then. Well, Steve Mignani here doing the Junkyard Crawl, not at Bernardston Auto Wrecking, but rather in the kitchen of my Fortress of Solitude in North Brookfield, Massachusetts. There's too much snow on the ground right now. We just got dumped on a couple days ago, and it'll probably be another 3 days or so before we go back to the junkyard and get back into the Junkyard Crawl. But in the meantime, folks who follow me on Instagram and also on Junkyard Crawl know that I love model cars. And I've done a lot of altered wheelbase cars. And in yesterday's video, we did a review of my Mopar-based altered wheelbase model projects. Today, let's look at the Fords. Now again, this one here is a loose interpretation of Dick Brannon's Bronco, which was his 1965, early 66 overhead cam 427 sock motored match racer. And again, the Ford Bronco four-wheel drive SUV was coming out in 66. Don't know if Dick Brannon, who was a Ford employee, wanted to pay a little attention to the Bronco or just was referring to the way that that four-speed camber bounced its way down the track like a bucking Bronco. But this one here, I did pretty much full detailing, did the grille, did the headlight and all that stuff. And the chassis on this one is fully kit bashed, I guess you might say. This is based on an old MPC kit. We'll get to that in a second, but I have the correct traction bars from a Thunderbolt, 9-inch rear axle, flat spotted wrinkle wall Goodyears, blue streaks here. And again, I did my best, even a single windshield wiper, which is kind of a Mopar thing, but I'm having fun. And the beauty of this, if you take an X-Acto blade, you can actually shave away where the other windshield wiper was molded. And if you look at it, you can kind of see the scars, but for the most part, an X-Acto blade dragged across plastic works as well as a scraper as it does as a cutter. Little pro tip there. Now this model is a 2+2 fastback. The thing of it is, until very recently, there was no 2+2 fastback, so I had to buy this. This is the MPC 1966 Mustang fastback kit, a very expensive model, but what a beautiful, beautiful illustration that is. And they're kind of sending you down, funny car terms, floating wheel, and this is like basically ready to be built as a drag car. You can also do it stock if you want, and there's Bud Anderson and Dean Jeffries. These are guys who are contracted by MPC to lend some assistance in building these things. But what I found with this was that the chassis was just no good. Here's the thing. The chassis on this thing, it's not horrible, but we can see that it's a hard left from what I ended up using. So the original chassis with the baked-in front suspension kind of sucks, but the body shell is wonderful, as is the interior. So what I did is I bought the kit from MPC for the body, and then what you do is you take other kits and use them for the guts. But moving forward, this is the AMT version of the Mustang 2+2. We can see that MPC and AMT, by the way, were fierce competitors like Nestle's and Hershey's or a Coke and Pepsi. So this is AMT's take on the Mustang 2+2. Totally different kit. Another very expensive model, this one here. And we can see right here, you know, just sort of do it up as a custom if you want. And it says display stand is not included, just in case. But something interesting here is that there might have been some licensing stuff. We can see what looks here to be GT350 stuff, but nowhere here is there reference. It says here, Mustang Fastback with Shelby American Mustang GT features. They don't say Shelby GT350, nor do they show it down here. So even in 65, there might have been some legal entanglements between AMT and Shelby, not sure. With that said, these models used to be really rare until about 2 weeks ago when AMT Round 2 reintroduced the 2+2 Mustang. It's virtually identical to the kit you would have paid $200 to $300 for on eBay a month ago. No joke. So now it's $35. But with that said, it's just as good as the original kit in every way. And yes, it has a fastback body style. If I'd have known about this kit a month or two ago, I would not have sacrificed an original MPC fastback. But live and learn. But here's the thing. This kit is already available, right? Some folks say, well, you know, AMT already makes one of these things. Well, here's the thing. This is the Model King version of Dick Brannon's Bronco. Now, the decals are great. The only bummer is that the kit inside is the old Street Freak. This is the kit you get. So sadly, we can see that the wheel openings are all wrong. So and the chassis is not right. So the box art and what you get inside are not quite the same thing, just saying. So what I do to remedy the fact that the body is great, but the chassis isn't, I kit bash, which means I take the chassis out of the 67 Ford Mustang, which is beautiful. This is a 1998 or so release, modern era. And the beauty of this thing is that it has a full detailed chassis. And this thing right here, that is the golden ticket right there, that chassis. You take that frame and you can do all kinds of cool stuff with it. And this allows you to have a model that's just as realistic underneath as it is up top. So that's the beauty of kit bashing. It's kind of expensive. You know, the average kit's 20 or 30 bucks, but compared to building a real car, this is kid stuff. But we're not kids anymore, obviously. Now here's the thing. The original overhead cam Mustangs had really big rear wheel openings, a big radius like that. Well, I didn't want to just hog it out and lose the lip. So what I ended up doing was taking kind of a little bit of crossbreeding. This is the Hurst Hemi Under Glass by AMT. It's a Barracuda, Steve. How on earth are you going to use parts from this under a Mustang? Well, this kit looks like this out of the box, right? Now what I was after is that big rear wheel opening right there. So what I ended up doing was grafting it from that kit into the Mustang. So there it is. The square part you see right there was sliced out and then grafted in here with some trimming. You can kind of see the body lines, or a little bit of body work popping out there. But in other words, this is the Mustang with the quarter panels of a Barracuda. Anyway, moving along, and that's a model I finished like a week ago. If you follow my Instagram, you'll see that thing going together kind of from square one to completion. Next up, we go to this. This is a model that I built maybe 2 or 3 months ago. This is a total what if. This is the IMC Ford Cougar II. Some would say, Cougar, that's a Mercury. No. Back in the early 60s, Ford actually had some show cars called the Cougar II. Beautiful little thing, fastback, based on a 427, or actually a Cobra chassis. We can see the tube frame underneath it, but I take it further. Thunderbolt traction bars, Ford 9-inch rear axle, parachute anchored to the rear axle, and the underside of, yup, an injected 427 Camry. And again, this is sort of a car that might have been built to take on the Grand Sport a Corvette in 63, 64 in a what-if NHRA drag race shootout. Now this model here is heavily modified. Of course, you know, the steering wheels on the front, I bake those things in. It's easily done. Just get the pin drill out and modify stuff so things work. And you flat spot the slick so it looks like it's sitting there with 5 pounds in the tire. Kind of a cool effect. But this kit itself is a wonderful thing. This goes all the way back to the 60s. This is IMC's original issue of the Cougar II. Now, of course, in this mode, it was more of a sports car than a drag car, but you can always modify them. Here's the chassis right here, based on the 289 Cobra right there, and IMC, the 260 high performance V8. And again, beautiful model, just long nose, beautiful little short deck. And this model was re-released a few times. In fact, here is the second re-release here. This is probably about 2 years later, a little less illustration, but just as beautiful. And the box art is, again, mouth-watering. As a little kid, if you're not drooling when you see this kit, you're not alive. But this thing lived on into the 1980s, in fact, and testers, here it is right here, the final iteration of the Cougar II. And I think this is still kind of available. These are like 30 bucks on eBay. You know, but again, this is from the time after the 1970s when box art had to depict the model inside. That was part of Jimmy Carter's administration, truth in advertising laws toward products aimed at kids. You had to show the model, which kind of got away from the cool pictures and brought you back down to reality. The good news, though, is that the Cougar II is a decent model, even in stock trim. Kind of blah, but all the same, it's a really cool piece. Opening doors. You can see here, well, this one fell off, doesn't matter. But again, with that said, you know, nice little model, opening deck lid and stuff. So a cool little thing. But again, I take it a couple steps further and go to that, you know. I mean, some would say it's the same model. Not really. A lot of changes done. But anyway, that's the story of this one. Now, this one was also featured from A to Z on my Instagram. If you go to my Instagram, Steve Mag's Instagram, you can watch that go together. Now, coming up here, the final Ford here, this is something kind of neat. There's a thing called the UDRA, the United Drag Racers Drag Circuit, Midwest, and they did sort of an altered wheelbase door slammer thing in 66, 67. This is a what if Ford 427 Fairlane with the camera, of course, overhead cam. And on this one here, what I did is basically took the Ford Thunderbolt blister and cut it very delicately so the injectors for the Hilborns pop right through. It took a long time to get that done, but it adds a lot to the model. And of course, full chassis detail. Again, this model's pretty decent. The AMT Fairlane has a great suspension. All these things can be worked with. I did go for a straight axle. These are just kit bashed bits out of the box. And the engine on this one is another 427 camera. You've got to have a camera. Ford's doomsday weapon of the 1960s. And believe it or not, the 4.6 and the Coyote and the Voodoo all are grandchildren of this engine. Chain-driven cams, pretty much the same deal as Ford was playing with back in 64, 5, 6, and 7. And this model, right out of the box, is pretty decent. You can use this kit here if you want to, or this one here. There's the original issue on the top, the GTA, which came out, I think, in 1994 or something like that. But again, these are models that were rendered in more recent times and very, very detailed. The 60s stuff would have been more like a toy, so the model industry ain't dead. Still doing really, really good work. Now, what I did on this one here is the stock Fairlane body is pretty cool, but you can see very subtly the rear wheels have been moved forward. You can see I stretched the wheel opening probably a scale half a foot, and that was part of the UDRA Midwest Match Race Association. They would kind of take a door slammer, give it more traction by moving the axle forward, and come up with a door slammer. It was kind of half super stock, half FX car. Kind of neat. And that kind of brings us into the world of future products or projects I want to do. And I've always had a love for the stretch nose Mustangs of 66 and 67, that right there. This, of course, is the Tasca Ford unit. The trouble is, there's never been a model of that, or has there? Well, it's a thing called the Resin Cottage Industry, and this basically is a resin model right here. It's ready to go, and this is kind of mocked up a little bit. We can see, though, that it's been totally stretched. Somebody took the time to modify this. There's companies like the Good Stuff and et cetera, but the only thing is, these are made one at a time, and resin is hand poured. You know, these are parts that are not made in a mass assembly situation. So these are fairly expensive, like $100 anyway. But what you get here is the raw material to build something that never existed in real life. Now, the only bummer with resin sometimes is the thickness. You know, they can kind of be kind of thick because, again, these are made in a mold, male and female, and they're kind of, you know, they're not like an AMT mass-produced piece. But these open the door to a stretch nose Mustang if you want to do that. And I might be building this one. Again, the only problem again with resin, you have to clean these with Wesley's bleach white. Otherwise, even super glue won't adhere. There's resin and oil in these things. You got to clean them. Otherwise, paint won't adhere. They're kind of problematic. It ain't like styrene, but they're still cool if it's no other choice. Moving along, we have some cool old box art. You know, I love box art. Now, we talked again about how you know, Jimmy Carter in the mid-70s forward forced kit makers to release kits with a picture of what's inside. You can say, it says a photo of actual model, it'll say, yeah, because it had to reflect what you got because of some sins of the past. What do I mean by that? Well, this is Palmer Plastics. These guys are located in Brooklyn, New York. You know, it shows a micrometer. You'd assume there'd be some technology inside, some accuracy, etc. But the box is pretty stimulating. You know, basically a really cool illustration. But when you open it up, well, this is where the kid starts crying. Oh, multi-piece body. You know, seats molded into the floor. Oh, the sides have to be glued on separately. The proportions are from a snapshot. The chassis detail, oh, not too good. And again, it has a void in the back for an electric motor. So the problem with the Palmer model of a Mustang is that it's basically a toy, and that box art could really fool you. Now, Palmer did up their game a little bit. This is the 71 Mach 1, and again, Palmer scale models. They kind of changed their logo to kind of look like the MPC logo. The box art's nicer, beautiful illustrations, but again, kind of distorted with that said, you know, not really what you get inside. The parts and pieces inside, they're now at this point emulating what MPC and AMT did. This is 1971-72 with the big new Mustang, right? The Mach 1. What's inside? Well, if the box art is correct, it's got to be a nice little model. Well, here we go again. It's not terrible. They finally got to a one-piece body shell. The chassis has all the stuff molded in, not too cool, whatever. But again, it's kind of realistic. It's a little long in the front, but if you look at the back, it looks more like a 69 Mustang, whereas this front looks like a 71. Kind of weird, you know? So they were probably cloning AMT and MPC kits. So again, this is Palmer's effort to be a little better But getting down to the real stuff, the big dogs in the world of models, AMT. When I was a kid, box art like this just blew my brain. You know, Mach 1, a little play on Mach 1, it won the race. Get it? Mach 1. And the car's bombing off the line. Christmas tree just went green. The front tires are hovering, and the guy driving it is just about to win the race. The box art on the side, just beautiful. Now, here's the thing. It says Boss 429 on the box, right? Well, the engine is a 427 Cammer Hemi Killer Mill. So that's a Cammer. That's a Boss 429. If you know your Fords, those are two very different engine programs. So you got to wonder what's going on. And here it is right here, the Ford Fomoco 427 engine, not a Boss 429. But they're talking about, you know, it looks like it's a Boss 9 Mustang right there. What's up? Well, Ford, I guess, realized the error of their ways and midway through 1970 released a second version of the Mach 1. Same basic kit inside. Box art on the side is the same, except Boss 429 is now gone. So you got to wonder if maybe somebody from Ford said, hey, you guys, you're looking stupid out there because that's not a Boss 9. The rest of the kit's pretty much the same. So it's interesting. Box art can sometimes have its own story right here. The first generation left, second generation, both of these sold in 1970. Kind of interesting. And going further with nomenclature on model kits, this here is also a 1970 Mustang from AMT, same company, but this one is not a funny car. This does not have a flip body. This is more of a stocker. You can see right here, you can build it as a stock, custom, or drag. And on this side here, we see all the goodies. Has a Cobra Jet hood scoop. But the weird thing about this one is the way they illustrate. It's a 429 Hemi Blue Crescent. What is that? Well, in '68, when rumors of the Boss 429 came out, the twisted Hemi, they called it the Blue Crescent for about 10 seconds in Ford marketing. Well, nobody told AMT. By 1970, they were still using terminology that was 2 years old. So interesting that the Blue Crescent Mustang with the 429 Hemi, not the Boss 429 that it actually is, was on the market. I wonder how many kids got confused by this. I did. And then finally, you know, speaking of AMT, another Mustang that came out in '69, '70. This is the Gas Ronda stretch nose funny car right here. Now this is built purely as an altered wheelbase car. You can see the blueprints that were used by the AMT designers when they made the tooling. How cool is that? The blueprint right there. And again, this one has the full-on Logie Brothers chassis with a 427 Cammer. This thing even has a record inside, and it's actually there. In fact, if you go back to the Junkyard Crawl video of maybe 2 weeks ago, we did one on a 1970 Mustang. I think it was a 302 car, but I use this as a prop. Go back to that video. You'll see this video and you'll see the record that's inside, never been played. And moving finally to the world of Ford Mustangs. Now we all know the Mustang II came along in '74, the first downsized Mustang based on a Pinto, depressing stuff, Mustang II. And that went from '74 through '78. Well, there was a Mustang II before that. This is 1963, and this is the IMC model of the Ford Mustang II, complete with Roman numeral 2. The idea, this is actually the interim car between the Mustang I, which was a mid-engine V4 powered little two-seater, and the actual Mustang of 64.5. This was something that Ford teased the press with, but this model is a really nice one. It has a great chassis, and again has a little small block Ford engine with possible working steering, tri-carbs if you want them, mag wheels, and again the box art on this thing will just make any kid into a model builder. Wild decal sheet. And again, Industrial Motive Corporation of Troy, Michigan, not be confused with AMT, which was in Troy as well. But again, this one has lots of cool stuff. This is the first release. The second release came out very similar. We can see here, of course, it's not quite as exciting to look at, but with that said, different box art on the sides. And we can kind of tell that, you know, they were looking to maybe facelift or freshen the packaging. But something kind of interesting on this one is the stick-on afterthought unassembled little label right there. That's actually something that was stuck on at IMC. Perhaps somebody said, I thought that was a toy. No, it's an unassembled model. So somehow, some way, I'm thinking a lawyer was behind that right there. But again, the IMC shows us that the Mustang II didn't come out in '74. It came out in '63. There it is right there. And finally, let's talk about the world of, you know, we've talked about resin cast things like this, which are interesting, but again, the problem with these are limited by the manufacturer, which is usually a couple of guys working out of the basement, their ability to pour these things and not have rejects. Well, meanwhile, the world of 3D computer printing is really taking over. And what I mean by that, these things here, these are 3D printed American Racing torque thrust wheels. They're very realistic. They're printed on an angle, so there's not as much terracing, but look at how weird these things are. I mean, this pad, it's a resin, and he's used super glue, but if you look at this right here, you pull the wheel off, and you get these weird little sticks underneath it that it's almost like something from the bottom of the ocean. Kind of creepy if you ask me. But with that said, 3D printing is an amazing emerging technology that might open the door to some unavailable model kits from the past. And before I close out, I want to show this thing off. This is an amazing thing. This is a slant 6 3D printed engine right here. This is one piece. That's the block. And it even has the casting numbers and the oil pump, the fuel pump. These are molded in. Look at how intricate that is. The oil filter right there. The hyperpack intake manifold. There it is right there from the 1960 Junior or the baby stock program. And even cooler and crazier is the torque flight transmission with the starter motor molded in. Absolutely correct, beautifully done. And then mind-blowing, the carburetor. Here's the Holly 4-barrel that somebody, I guess, would have maybe used on one of these things. Look, you can see the Venturis inside, the choke plate, and even on the side, the linkage is all integral. The 3D printer has the ability to actually make these tiny parts. If this was a molded piece out of a kit, this would be 5 pieces you'd glue together. So I think 3D printing, in fact, this one here, is done by Charles Estes of Texas 3D Customs. I bought this thing online on YouTube. In fact, if you, not YouTube, but eBay, if you enter the word 3D printed model car parts, you will see a universe of cool stuff. And the price on this thing, I paid $40.91, including shipping and tax. So I dare say that if somebody was to take and scan an old Johan kit like this $400 Rambler, scan this thing, put it into a 3D printer, these kits could be re-released. And instead of 500 bucks, I'd pay 200 for something like this, no kidding. So it's interesting how models are not over with. You know, they often say that model builders are what they call rejuveniles. In other words, that's a sociological term for people who are adults, but they're still kids. You know, people 30 to 130. I'm definitely one of them. So I still build model cars. And in fact, we'll be back tomorrow with more Junkyard Crawl here at the Fortress of Solitude, my house in North Brookfield, Mass. It's snowing outside, so we'll be back tomorrow. Yesterday we did Mopar funny car models. Today we did Ford funny car models. Tomorrow we'll do GM funny car models. And of course, next week we will be back at the junkyard doing metal, rust, and getting right back into the Junkyard Crawl. But in the meantime, if you like this video, be sure to subscribe to the Steve Maggs YouTube channel, ring the bell, and subscribe, share it with your friends, give it a like, all that stuff. If you ring the bell, you'll know when the next video comes out, which is tomorrow morning.